Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times. This is the second set, second match against Sydin in the Rise of the Samurai mini tournament from the Something Awful forums. This time we're playing on Numazawa, and I've switched up my army a little bit for this one. I've got 3 units of Foot Samurai, 1 unit of Naginata Warrior Monks, my Naginata Warrior Monk heroes, Naginata Levy, my general, and all the way over here I've got a unit of Sword Attendants, and a unit of Mounted Naginata hidden in the woods. My opponent, largely hidden in the woods, but you'll see him pop in and out from time to time. I largely remember what he had. It's 3 Bow Levy, 2 Naginata Levy, 2 Naginata Warrior Monks, his Mounted Naginatas, his General's Bodyguard with another unit of Mounted Naginata over on that side, and his Tetsubo Warrior Monk heroes. Now, once again, I just want to talk a little bit about what my plan was coming in here and what I thought my opponent's plan would be. Now, Numazawa is a peculiar map. It's broken into these sort of 2 sides of the river here. One player starts over here, and they start weighted heavily to one side. So he starts limited to here. He can't start over here if he wanted to, even though it's on his half. Conversely, these units are about as far to my right as they can start, and the rest of my army over here is just starting fairly directly straight ahead. So that means typically what you'll see is one player has access to the workshop, and the other player has access to the farmhouse and sword dojo over on this other side, which on this particular map is about an even trade. However, Sydin has decided to deploy all of his forces back here and try and go for the workshop. And this is the first thing that was a bit different from what I had planned. Generally what I will plan on is my opponents taking these 2 dojos and then having to fight, or one of us having to fight across the river. That's basically just how this map normally goes. But in this case, my opponent has gone for the workshop, and the reason that this doesn't bother me is that I start significantly closer to the workshop, meaning it's easy for me to run my units up, get them set up, and start capturing it. And it also gives me the opportunity to throw away this Naginata Levy at that workshop, or the sword dojo, to capture it. Now, my general strategy for this one was assuming that he would try and sort of set up along these riverbanks here to guard the sword dojo. And as I was trying to fight my way across, I could use my sword attendants and my mounted Naginata to swing around behind him and generally sort of pincer him in, since there's very little room to maneuver in this narrow area. That would have given me a very decisive blow. However, as you can see, that's not what's happened. So what I had to do was immediately sort of assess his army here. My decision to sort of stay on this side instead of crossing the river, taking those 2 buildings, and fighting that way was based on what his army composition was. Now, there's a particular army composition where I would have fled this building and I would have crossed the river and forced him to go across, which is to say, if he had a lot of sword attendants, I would have crossed the river. The reason being that their devastating charge and their low cost would completely wreck my foot samurai line. However, with the army he has, I determined that I could sort of stand here, get in a direct match even though I'm outnumbered, even though he's got more of a percentage of his forces over here, and win that directly. So, over here, I see that he's got his mounted Naginata moving out. I know that his general is moving back to meet his main army, and I'm capturing this workshop. And the workshop is a great building for this particular map, because normally when you're fighting across the river, bows become more important. Since we're not doing that, however, it's just basically a luxury item. It's not crucial anymore. In this case, that means that I want to capture the sword dojo as well. The sword dojo becomes much more important. He's sort of moved his mounted Naginata, but I don't think he actually knows what he wants to use them for. And this is important. If you're not comfortable with a particular unit or its usage, it's generally a poor decision to take it. In fact, his entire army in this particular match is very uncharacteristic of him, and I think he was trying to mix it up to try and sort of throw me for the loop. But in this particular case, that doesn't work because he himself wasn't, I think, as comfortable with these unit types as he normally would be. So here I'm just sort of maneuvering my Naginata Levy around to make sure they get a good frontage against these cav if they try to charge them. But he's not going to make that mistake. On the other hand, I've sprung my trap here of my mounted Naginatas running out to capture his. And basically what I want to be able to do is pincer him between these 2 units if he turns to fight, or If he doesn't, I want to be able to defeat him with my army. Now at this point, this was where he decides to just sort of go straight for my general. And I knew that that's what he was planning to do at this point. So there were two options that I could have done at this point in time. What I could have done, and what most people would have done, is move their Naginata warrior monk hero to screen their general, move their general further into the army, and protected them that way. And what would have happened was Sydin would have deflected his unit, looped around my army, and joined up back with his main army. That's the optimal solution given that circumstance. But I wanted to capture and destroy these mounted Naginata, and to do that I had to make a quick calculation, and that's why I'm moving my general up towards this riverbank towards him. Now, one of the things you need to know is that your general is not going to die in the initial charge against him. He has 2 hit points. Everyone in General's bodyguard has 1 hit point. Every other soldier in the game, other than heroes, have 1 hit point. So if they get hit, they die. Your general can take 2 hits, so that charge bonus, even if it wounds your general, will not kill him. And what this means is that I could safely put my general up front there if I knew that I could defeat the mounted Naginata before they got another chance to kill my general. So my decision was to move them forward, make him think that I was vulnerable here, destroy his mounted Naginata, because I want them off the map. So I knew that I was going to take significant damage on my general, but as you can see, already picking away a couple of his men with my general. They're firing arrows at him. And what I also need to do in this particular scenario is move these back to cover against his other unit of cavalry. So these guys have to be in close to my general. You can see that his unit has charged in. I've inspired my general to raise his defense to make it less likely that he'll die from this attack, and I've gotten my cavalry in on the back of his cavalry. So I'm going to lose a lot of men, but he is going to lose that cavalry unit. Now, the other part of the calculation that I had to make here was my army composition, and that's the main question here. Could I lose my general? And the answer is yes. I have very little levy in this army. My front line consists of all high morale samurai units who are very capable of holding a big fight without losing, and just even if the general's dead, they're not going to run. Monks, same thing. Heroes, these guys are actually a pseudo-general. I can use these guys to replace my general if I need to. So even if I lost my general in this attack, it wouldn't have affected me as much as it would have affected him, because he's relying on things like levy, a lot of levy, and just a few Naginata warrior monks. So that was a calculation I made that I was able to sort of exploit. Here you can see he gets his second mounted Naginata caught in with mine. He was trying to sort of follow up, get my general, but my my Naginata warrior monk heroes were in a pretty good position to cover in case he got through, slipped around, and got at my general. Instead, they are going to charge in on them, and that'll be fine. Now, as you can see, sort of in the front lines, I was kind of ignoring them. I still positioned my Naginata warrior monks further out to get the flank bonus, but for the most part, Naginata Levy and Naginata warrior monks are going to lose against foot samurai in a direct punching fight, just because foot samurai are one of the best units in Rise of the Samurai. Their only disadvantage is that small unit size, but when you've got units bunched up like this, you've got this sort of concave, they're going to usually just outright win. Over on this flank, my foot samurai are getting mulched by these Tetsubo warrior monk heroes, but they're already down to 10 men. He's going to do a suicidal charge against my general, but at this point, and especially since I didn't care earlier, killing my general now would have very little impact on the battlefield. As you can see over here, I was not idling with my Naginata Levy and my sword attendants. They actually charged around here. I got a bonsai charge against his Naginata warrior monks, and this means that he had to pull a unit over to this flank instead of committing it frontally, and if he had committed it to the front, he would have taken out this unit of foot samurai, potentially swept around the sides, and maybe have done a little bit more good with that. But as you can see, his army's in full retreat, and this just sort of goes to show that something that looks really good can be disastrous. If he had used his cavalry for something else, for pretty much anything else, if he had forced me to keep my own sort of inner reserve, if he had swept it around back and kept him alive, he would have been in a much stronger position to use that mobility to sort of hammer the back of my lines here, or to sort of reinforce over here, or smash through these foot samurai and get around the back faster. But since he lost both units early on, he couldn't do that. Even if he had kept the second unit, I would have had to have shadowed it with my Naginata warrior, my mounted Naginatas, and that would have kept mine out of the fight, at the very least. Now, mine weren't actually that pivotal after they eradicated both his units' cavalry, but that just sort of goes to show that the reason you should take cavalry isn't just about mobility. It's sometimes useful for them to be a counter to the opponent's cavalry, shut down their mobility. And if you can do that with less cavalry than he has, you're going to be in a very good position in the melee fight that ensues. Also, in this particular matchup, I wanted my front line to appear a lot weaker so that he'd directly charge it instead of trying anything too special. And that's what Foot Samurai are great for. People sort of assume that since they're an archer unit, they're not necessarily going to perform well in melee for their cost. And for their cost, that's sort of true. If they get hit by a Bonsai Charge, they're going to be in deep trouble just because there's so few of them. But against things like Levy and Neganetta Warrior Monks, they're actually extremely economical. And they're usually going to pull through for their cost. So it's always worth keeping in mind that they're usually going to win those fights. Now here you can see I deployed a very small army, 640 men. I've suffered 239 losses, but killed 733. My opponent's taken 1,180 men, and yeah. So this is sort of more what you should expect from your Foot Samurai. I've got 141, 147 kills, and this unit of Foot Samurai that only got 79 kills actually killed a lot of those Tetsubo Warrior Monk heroes. They killed 10 of them. And that's an incredible, like, they paid for themselves more than once over. So that's an amazing job by those guys. Sword attendants here. They did okay. They got 37 kills, lost 14 men. They were charging when they were tired through water to get that into the Naginata Warrior Monks. They aren't going to do amazing, but they are cheaper, and they were just sort of a throwaway flanking unit. So that distracted a bigger component of his army than it did mine, really. Naginata Levy, again, just for capturing buildings. Naginata Warrior Monks, 142 kills. They were just sort of in the front there, mostly killing Levy, so that's not really that impressive or surprising. Naginata Warrior Monk heroes, they were playing safety. They got a couple cavalry, they got a couple heroes. That was about it. And that's what they're sort of best for, in my opinion, is when you can use them to sort of defend your units, but also provide that morale bonus that they're most important for. You're getting double duty out of them. I don't like attacking with them just because they're actually fairly fragile. But when they can do what they were doing, that's usually a good thing. I mounted Naginata. They wiped out 2 of his units of cavalry, essentially by themselves, and they managed to get around and wipe out a lot of his archers in that final charge, but at that point they weren't that necessary. Switching over to Sydin's view, his Tetsubo Warrior Monks, again, a little bit too little too late. They charged, did a good amount of damage to my, what are they called, Foot Samurai, but they got shredded up by arrows on the way in, and that was a bit unfortunate. Screening them with something might have helped, but I was particularly targeting them, so hard to say. Both of his units of Naginata Warrior Monks did a little bit poorly. The one in the river is this one. It did a little bit better. Both his Naginata, mounted Naginata, I think were mishandled a little bit. He went for that sort of charge that everybody sort of would go for, but it should have probably screamed trap to him, in my opinion. Although, to be fair, if he hadn't gone for it, I would have charged him with my general, so he would have been caught either way. So probably the best move he could have made, given that, but still, it's one of those situations where he probably could have managed his mounted Naginata a little bit better. His Naginata Levy, they're both throwaway units, just the same as mine. This is a problem taking 3 of them just because they are throwaway units. You don't want that many units to throw away. Same thing with the Bow Levy, they're throwaway units. You don't want to take 3 units of them. And you certainly don't want to spend any veterancy if you can afford not to, but sometimes that's just what you have left kicking around, so that's excusable. Either way, though, I would have replaced them with a better unit. Anyway, these were very good matches to Sydin. Good game to him. He definitely betrayed my expectations, and he had some surprising games there. And despite what I was commenting on about how, he made these mistakes that I was able to capitalize on, these were much harder games than I've been having otherwise, because, like, everyone makes mistakes. I was making mistakes in both games, if you can spot them. I'm sure you can, but what you need to realize is that since everyone is making mistakes, it's the player who makes less mistakes that's going to win, but it's also the player who has a better plan that's going to generally make less mistakes, since they've got more stuff premeditated. That way they don't have to sort of think about as many things during the course of the battle. But since Sydin was doing things that I wasn't expecting, And since he was doing fairly well, it's all made it much more difficult for me to perform at my optimal. Anyhow, let's move on to game 3.